All right, thanks for coming, everybody. It's great to see everybody here. Make some noise if you're having a good time at ClioCon so far. Yeah, thanks. We've got a great session in store for you today. We're going to be looking at KPIs, or key performance indicators. And just so you can't say we didn't warn you, we're going to use a bit of Microsoft Excel in this session, so this is your last chance to escape. Hey, not you, Fiona.
Just kidding. So before we dive into the fun stuff, let us give you a bit of an introduction about ourselves. My name is Fiona, and I'm a business operations analyst at Clio, like our lovely colleague Brittany just mentioned. And I've been with Clio for 1.5 years now. And my day-to-day involves looking at data and providing decision makers with clarity around all the data that we have in the company. Prior to Clio, I worked in finance, and as you can imagine, I spent a lot of time in Excel. When I'm not in the office, you might be able to find me hiding from the rain that we have in Vancouver at my jewelry studio, or perhaps on a plane jet setting off to my next travel destination. I don't often get to talk to our many wonderful customers, so I'm super, super, super excited to be here today, to get to meet all of you, to talk to all of you, and to share some of my learnings as I transition from finance to tech. And during that transition, I realized that although the types of data inputs are different for various industries, the power and value of data analysis are parallel. And if there's anything that I hope you get from the session today, is I hope to spark some interest in you for data analysis.
Thanks, Fiona. My name is Roger, and I'm with Clio's customer support department. I've been with Clio since last November, so if you've called this year and spoken to the Aussie guy, that's me. So I grew up in sunny Perth, Western Australia, and after college, I moved to North America. I love to travel, just like Fiona, and I've been to 32 countries and counting. On a more serious note, I'm a numbers guy. My background's in mechanical engineering and finance, and like Fiona, spent my fair share of hours in Microsoft Excel. I've also started and run my own business, so I know what it's like having to wrestle with calendar syncs and QuickBooks Online. My hope is that from this session, you will walk out empowered to dig into your own firm's numbers to start measuring and managing your business.
So Roger and I have a great session in store for you. We promise that the return on investment on this 1 hour you're here will be positive. So today we're going to talk about what KPIs are and why you should care. We're also going to dive into how you can choose KPIs and look at a few specific examples. Once we have a good understanding, we're going to show you how to use Clio to track the data, how to export that, and how to run the numbers in Excel for a KPI of choice. And lastly, we're going to basically explain what we're going to do with a KPI and how that's going to help you grow your firm. To make some of this information more digestible, we're going to follow the journey of our lovable lawyer from How I Met Your Mother, Marshall Erickson, as he leaves a job at a big corporate firm to start his own practice. And Marshall is new to managing his practice, so he really wants to know how he can define success and how he knows he's on the right track along the way.
Thanks. So many of you have probably seen this quote before: what gets measured gets managed. This comes to us from Sir William Thomson, who also went by Lord Kelvin. And for anybody who remembers absolute zero temperature from high school chemistry, this is the same multi-talented Lord Kelvin. Now, what this quote means to me is that the act of measuring a quantity causes it to be managed. First, in deciding that a quantity is important enough to be measured, you're drawing some attention to it and giving some focus to it. And secondly, the act of measurement itself over a period of time means you have to pay attention to that quantity, and that will also in turn manage it. Now, key performance indicators. Does anybody in the audience, have you heard this term before? Do I have any descriptions or definitions from the audience? Right there in the third row. Absolutely, yeah. A way to standardize the data to see if you're achieving your goals. Great. Yeah, let's break this term down. So we'll start from the end and work backwards. An indicator is, you guessed it, it measures something or indicates something. Adding the word performance to indicator means it's pertaining to the performance of the operations of your firm. And finally, a key performance indicator isn't just any old performance indicator. It's one of a handful of carefully chosen metrics that you've decided to measure based on your firm's strategies and goals. Now, you may have just noticed I threw the word metrics in there, and you'll often hear these two words used almost interchangeably. Now, the Oxford English Dictionary defines metrics as a set of figures or statistics used that measure results, whereas key performance indicators, on the other hand, are a subset or carefully chosen subset of metrics that your firm has used or decided to measure to track specific goals or outcomes. Now, the key thing to remember is that although all KPIs are metrics, not all metrics are KPIs.
So you might be wondering why you should care. So let's work backwards. Let's start with your vision. Think about the vision that you have for your firm 5 years from today. Now think about all the steps and things that you need to do to get to that vision. These will form your strategic goals. Are there any uncertainties along the way? There's probably a lot of questions that are unanswered. How do you know if you're on the right track? Are you doing the right thing? Well, this is where KPIs can help. So our friend Marshall, he has a vision of growing his small practice into a mid-sized firm. And in his strategic roadmap, he wants to build market share and build out his brand. Along the way, he really wants to know if he's on the right track achieving his goal. So he did some research online to see, what are the best practices and what he can do. And he found this case study on modern law. Some of you might actually have read this before. Modern law is a family law practice founded by Billy Tarascio out in Arizona. And just as a side note, she's actually speaking at the conference tomorrow on how to run a modern law firm. So check it out if you're interested. So in summary, or just in short, a few years ago, modern law experienced net profit margin not being where they wanted it to be. So they knew that some things needed to change if they want to see increase in profits. So they got really serious about tracking what matters and looking very closely at their business. When they looked closely, they saw a few key areas of their business to focus on, and one of them was client acquisition. One of the KPIs that they chose is the consultation to client conversion rate, and it was not good, and they realized they needed to make some improvements. Just to cut the story short, once they implemented changes, they were able to use the same KPI to see if the changes that they implemented were effective. And in the end, they saw positive results. So in short, KPIs are powerful systems that can help you track progress towards your strategic goals and your vision, and they can also help uncover areas of inefficiencies in your firm. Okay, so how many people are convinced that KPIs are a good thing and they should start looking at them? Oh, great. There's a lot of you. Glad you're here. So Roger, there's so many KPIs out there. Can you tell us, how are we supposed to choose?
That's a great question, Fiona. So there are quite literally hundreds of KPIs, if not thousands, out there. You've probably all heard of common ones such as revenue, profit, average matter value. Some of you may have even considered your customer acquisition cost, net promoter score, or realization rate. Now, if anybody's calculated their weighted average cost of capital or internal rate of return before, I'm going to grab a drink and you can come finish the rest of the presentation. Don't be shy. Okay, so take a moment, think of some of the KPIs that you currently use at your firm. And as we go through the next section, we're going to talk about some of the characteristics that make KPIs effective. And you can see how the ones that you're using stack up. Okay, well, as Fiona said, we have lots of KPIs to choose from. Keeping in mind, we're going for quality over quantity here, a handful of key performance indicators. We're not trying to measure everything under the sun. Now, some things to keep in mind are, first, Start with your strategy and your goals, and then choose your KPIs to inform those, and so you can progress in the areas you want to. Marshall, because his firm is growing, right now he's all about getting his name out there, establishing his brand, and he's reinvesting his revenue into things like marketing and biz dev, so he's not focused on profits just yet. Once he becomes more established and he wants to draw a larger or a more regular income, then he can switch his goals to profit, and his KPIs can follow accordingly. The next thing we want to do is have KPIs that are both measurable and benchmarkable. And I'm not entirely sure that benchmarkable is a real word, but I think you get the meaning of it. Choose KPIs that you can find industry benchmarks for, so that you can compare how your firm is doing compared to everybody else in your practice area, for example. Marshall can look in the legal trends report, which you guys heard about this morning, and look at the table of average matter values by practice area. Or alternatively, he could use Clio's legal rates benchmarking tool and compare his hourly or effective hourly rates against others in the same practice area and location.
So Roger and I went back and forth a little bit on what practical means when it comes to choosing KPIs. Ultimately, the point we're trying to make is that an effective KPI should also align with your firm's processes. You shouldn't have to go out of your way just to track a number. That's a lot of work. So when KPIs are practical, the actions that impact it are clear, and therefore the insights that you draw from the KPI are actionable. For example, average matter value is a practical KPI because, for example, if Marshall wants to increase average matter value, he could raise rates, or he could find larger cases. On the other hand, if average matter value is already high, he might focus on improving operational efficiency instead. One last thing to remember is that no single KPI tells the full story. Each KPI should be regarded as a data point in the context of all information so that the firm can make decisions on an informed basis. To elaborate, what if Marshall's clients with high value cases are cost disproportionately more to bring in? Or if he's flat fee, they take a disproportional amount of time longer to complete. In that case, he would do well to look at the cost of acquisition and his effectively hourly rate as well. Okay, so now we know how to choose KPIs. We can dive into a few specific examples. Let's start again by considering your goals. In making the legal trends report this year, Clio asked law firms to tell us the top business problems that they're looking to solve. And the top 4 goals were increasing revenue, improving operational efficiency, hiring more staff, and improving client satisfaction.
Thank you, Fiona. We're going to be focusing on these 3 firm goals this session: increasing revenue, improving client satisfaction, and improving operational efficiency. Now, show of hands, who thinks revenue is an important thing to keep track of? Yep, glad I'm not the only one. Okay, so revenue is a high-level goal, and what I mean by that is you don't just go out and increase revenue directly, because there are many things that contribute towards revenue. If we break it down, we're not the only ones. 84% of lawyers state that revenue is one of the top goals they're looking to increase this year. When we break it down, revenue is the sum of all your individual sales. So that's the money you receive for the first matter you do in a period of time, plus the money you receive for the second matter, and so on. Add all these up, you get your total revenue for that period. Another way of looking at this is that revenue is equal to the number of cases you do multiplied by the average matter value, or average value of those cases. Now, each of these 2 can be treated as KPIs and measured accordingly. Now, every time you add a matter to Clio, you add time, generate a bill, or make a payment, you're providing the inputs that you'll use to calculate these. For number of matters, you can pick a time period and simply count the number of matters that you closed in that time period to get this KPI. Similarly, for average matter value, you can look at your revenue report, generate it for a certain time period. Each row corresponds to 1 matter. Take the average of those numbers, and that's your average matter value. Great. Once calculated, you can compare that against benchmarks. So earlier we mentioned in the, whoops, yeah.
It's okay. You're doing a good job. So yes, as Rogers mentioned, once you've calculated, you could compare it to an industry benchmark. In this case, average matter value, you could rely on one of the sources that we produce, the Legal Trends Report. And so let's dive into an example. Our friend Marshall, he calculates the first 5 matters being $540. So he can compare it to our legal trends data, and he sees, he's below average and below the half of the population for which we have data on corporate law firm. So at this point, you might be wondering, what can he do? Well, he can dig deeper to find out why. Are the cases that he's bringing in too small, or are his rates too low? It might be difficult to find benchmarks for case size, but we could also leverage Clio's legal rates benchmarking tool to see if his rates are aligned with the industry average. So to get to this page, it's actually on under the resources on our Clio website, or you can Google compare your hourly rates with other lawyers, or another search engine of your choice. So we can enter that in. Marshall practiced in New York. He's a lawyer. Area of corporate law, hourly rate of $280. So he finds that his rates are actually 21% below average. So this insight is actionable because as an experienced lawyer with big firm experience, he knows that he can raise rates and still be competitive in the market. On the other hand, if average matter value is already high for Marshall, and his rates are aligned, he could also he might be doing well on a per case basis, but he probably wants to focus in bringing more work or improving efficiency so that he can bring in the same revenue for less time. On that note, we're not done yet. On that note, when we're talking about revenue, it's important to think about whether it's revenue or profit that's the end goal. If you have higher revenue, but your costs are also higher, are you actually better off? As Rogers touched on earlier, Marshall's a growing firm, and gaining market share and building out his brand is part of his growth plan. So he might want to sacrifice short-term profits for growth. If you're an established firm looking to improve income, then profit might be a more relevant goal for you. So in our survey, 84% of our respondents said that revenue is their top goal, one of their top goals. So we want to challenge those firms who answered answer to that question with that result to consider whether it's actually revenue or profit that they're after.
All right. On to our second business goal of the session, client satisfaction. Now, you all saw this in the keynote this morning. On a scale of 0 to 10, how likely are you to refer us to a friend or a colleague? Hands up if you've been asked this question before. And then hands stay up if you've been asked by Clio before. Great. This is a single question survey for Net Promoter Score, or NPS. Now, as you all heard in the keynote this morning, this is a metric that's gained a lot of popularity in recent years. And the idea is that the higher likelihood that somebody is going to refer you correlates to a higher amount of satisfaction they are with your product or services. Now, to measure this, or how NPS works, clients respond with a number between 0 and 10 on how likely they are to refer you. Those who respond with a 0 through to a 6, we call those detractors, and these are people who are going to discourage people they know from using your services. 7s and 8s are considered passives, and passives will neither discourage or promote other people to use your services. And finally, those who respond with a 9 or a 10, we call them promoters. These people will actively say, hey, Marshall's doing a great job, you should hire him. Net Promoter Score is simply the percentage of those who give a 9 or a 10, your promoters, subtract the percentage of those who give between a 0 and a 6, your detractors.
We can go through a few examples. So let's say all of your customers are promoters. We'll have 100%, which means none of them are detractors. So we have 100 minus 0. You have an NPS score of 100. If you have an NPS of 100, you should go write a book on NPS and sell it to us. On the flip side, if none of your clients are promoters and all of them are detractors, then you have 0 minus 100, and you have an NPS score of negative 100. Let's go into a more realistic example. Let's say 61% of your customers are promoters, and 18% of them are detractors. We have 61 minus 18. You have an NPS score of 43. And note here, although we're subtracting one percentage from another percentage, the resulting range is negative 100 and 100. So NPS is not a percentage, it's just a number. In terms of benchmarking, 0 NPS is considered good, 50 is great, excellent actually, and 70 is world-class. And by world-class, we mean companies like Apple, Costco, and Nordstrom. As we heard in the keynote earlier, the legal industry has an NPS of 25. So, it's not bad, but there's definitely room for improvement. And what a great way to stand out from your competitors when you're delivering excellent customer satisfaction when they're only averaging 25 in the industry. On that note, it's good to keep in mind, according to our last year's LTR, Legal Trends Report, we know that 62% of consumers hire lawyers through a referral from family or friends. So it is really important to deliver excellent customer satisfaction.
Great. To measure NPS, you first need to ask that question. So you send your customers that survey. You might use an off-the-shelf product that is built to measure NPS. Clio uses one called Delighted. Or you might simply start out by using a Google form and capturing your results in Google Sheets. Now, whatever tool you use to measure NPS, keep in mind that NPS isn't a one-time measurement. You want to measure it through time so you can track how you're progressing and seeing how the changes you're making are affecting your business. Now, you start off by measuring NPS, sending the survey, getting the number, and calculating your NPS. You also get that open-ended comment when you send the survey out, and that opens the door to conversations with your customers. You can talk to your detractors to find out what you can do better to make their experience better. You can talk to passives to find out what you need to do to turn them into promoters. And you can talk to promoters to find out what you're doing well so that you can double down on those things. Armed with that information, you can then improve your product or service offering, which in turn improves client satisfaction and NPS again. Great. And in terms of the bigger picture, you can't look at NPS alone, similar to any other KPI. What you could do is look at your actual referrals, which I know some of you are tracking with custom fields already, and see if there's any correlation between NPS and referrals.
Great, so we can move on to our last firm goal for the session, which is operational efficiency. So Marshall is a new father to cute little baby Marvin. So he has limited capacity in what he could do for his law firm. He can only put in 8 hours a day. So he knows that he needs to be more efficient so that he could still increase revenue for the firm while putting in the same amount of time. In our survey, 80% of the respondents said that they wanted to be more efficient with their time by reducing time spent on administrative and other non-billable tasks. So our friend Marshall's in the same boat because he knows operational efficiency can directly impact profits. Let's take a step back, though. What is operational efficiency? Well, simply, it's the ratio between the inputs required to run a business versus to the outputs that you get out of it. So in Marshall's example, he works 8 hours a day, that's the inputs required, and what he gets out of this is the revenue that he gets from the cases. So to increase operational efficiency, like I mentioned, would be to maximize or increase the amount of money that he can bring in for the same amount of inputs, 8 hours a day. One KPI we can look at here is utilization rate. Utilization rate is simply the billable hours worked divided by the number of available hours in a workday. This KPI is especially useful for law firms because it can tell you whether you're spending the time on the right tasks, such as those that are generating revenue. In our legal trends report, utilization rate averages around 30%. So there's a huge area of opportunity to explore in terms of operational efficiency. Let's get back to Marshall. So Marshall knows in order to scale, he probably needs to hire an office administrator to help him support his firm's operations. Until then, it's just himself, so he really wants to know what's his utilization rate, just to see and understand the overall productivity of his firm.
Great. So utilization rate is the KPI that we're going to focus on and dive into in a little more detail on for the rest of the session. By the end of this next section, we'll have captured the data you need to calculate utilization rate in Clio, exported it, and calculated the actual utilization rate itself in Excel. To do that, we'll start by showing you the best way to capture it in Clio. So let's go back to the utilization rate formula. Utilization rate is equal to billable hours divided by total hours worked, or available workday hours. And that's just the sum of your billable hours plus any non-billable hours that you spent working. Now, billable hours, you're already tracking in Clio, I hope. And secondly, non-billable hours, you can make an assumption about how many hours you're doing, but we can do better and actually measure and track that in Clio. Fiona's going to show you how to create an administrative matter in Clio so that you can use this to track any time spent doing work that's not directly billable to clients.
Great. So we're going to create an admin matter to track our non-billable time. So to do that, we're going to click on the green Global Create button and select Matter. First, we're going to add a contact for this matter. Under the drop-down, we can create a new contact. Let's call him admin.
Original parents.
Very creative. We don't need to fill in the rest of the information right now, so we could just save contact. Next, under matter description, we're going to put non-billable time. And under permissions, we're going to set permissions to everyone so that anybody in your firm can use this matter to track their non-billable activities. Now, let's scroll all the way down under the billing preferences section, expand that, and we can uncheck the matter as billable box so that it doesn't show up when you generate your bills every month for your clients. Next, we can add a custom rate for this matter. We could select for everybody so that this custom rate is applied to everybody, and just keep the rate at 0 because it's non-billable. And then we can save the matter. So to recap, we created an admin matter and created an admin contact for the matter. We set the matter description to non-billable time, and we set the permissions to everyone. Under the billing preferences section, we're going to uncheck the matter as billable box. And next time when you're performing non-billable activities, you can track your time using this matter.
OK, so Marshall just spent a couple of hours tidying up the job posting for the new assistant that he's going to hire. Now, the new assistant's going to improve his firm's productivity by freeing up Marshall's time to do higher value work and help deliver a better client satisfaction all over. But clearly, he's not going to build this to any particular client. So we're going to create time entries for both writing the job posting and posting the job posting itself. We'll start by clicking the green Global Create button on the top right, and this time entry. We'll enter the duration, 2 hours in the duration box, and then select the admin matter that we just created from the admin box. Notice at the bottom, the rate just changed to 0 when I selected that rate, which corresponds to the 0 custom rate that Fiona set earlier. I'm going to enter the description, writing job ad, and now I'm going to click Save and Duplicate. Save and Duplicate saves the current time entry, reopens the Add Time box, and pre-fills it with the same information that you saved the last time entry with, for when you're doing repeated time entries. This time, I'm going to change writing to posting and just save my entry. Great. Now, to recap, we created a new time entry, put in the duration, selected the admin matter. We entered the description, save and duplicate. Then we changed the description, just one little part of it, and hit save entry to put our second time entry in.
Thank you, Roger. So once the applications roll in for Marshall, he's going to be reviewing resumes and conducting interviews quite a number of times. So it'd be good to create an activity category for him at this point. You can think of activity categories as preset time entry templates with associated billing rates. You've all seen this before. This is a list in a spreadsheet, and someone likes to type in all caps, or if that person's fancy, like Roger, types in British English,
Hey.
something like that. Long story short, the activity category makes data entry more consistent by standardizing the inputs. And when it comes time to using this data in Excel, you're going to have much more fun and less frustrations, we promise. So to set up an activity category, we can click on the activity section in the main navigation bar on the right and click activity categories. This is where we're going to see all of our activity categories, and we can add a new one by clicking the Add Activity Categories button on the top right. Let's type in a name, interviewing candidates. We don't need to select a custom rate for non-billable time because we've set it at the matter level. We can save category at this point. Now, when Marshall adds a time entry, he can go to Global Create button, Time Entry, enter the duration, find the admin matter, find the activity category that we just created, and enter a description. And then save entry. And a quick way to see all the activities that are happening, we can click on Recents and click on the Admin Matter, click on the Activities tab, and that will list all the activities that you recorded recently. So to recap, we went to the Activities tab, we clicked on Activity Category, and we added an activity category. We entered a name and we saved it. We also showed you how to use an activity category when you're entering time.
Okay, so to recap that, first off, we created an administrative matter, which we made non-billable, so it's not going to show up when you bill your clients every month. Second, we created activity categories to standardize and quicken up your time entries. And lastly, we added the actual time entries for non-billable time to the administrative matter. Now, we want to acknowledge that this way of doing things is a bit of a Clio hack or a workaround. If you think there's value in having an inbuilt way to track non-billable time in Clio, head over to the Clio lab and tell them all about it. That's our little pitch.
Yeah, Clio lab down the hall. Great. So we know how to track billable time in Clio, and now we know how to track non-billable time. Let's get this data out of Clio and turn it into something meaningful. Clio has a lot of built-in reports. You can find them on the main navigation bar on the right, and you might have learned a thing or two about them in Alex and Natalia's session on reporting before this one. If you're interested in learning more, please feel free to book a session at the Smart Bar tomorrow. Roger can tell you all about it. Additionally, we want to give a quick shout out to one of our launch code finalists, MyFirmData, who specializes in custom reporting for Clio. If you're interested in learning more, you can check them out at their booth tomorrow. For the purpose of utilization rate, we're actually not going to use a standard report, but we're going to do an export of the activities data instead. There's a lot of data in Clio, so we're going to have to apply a few filters before we work with it. We could either export it and then export it and apply the filters in Excel, or we could apply some filters in Clio and then export it. We think Clio is a little easier, definitely more friendly, so we can do just that.
Great. So to do that, we'll start by clicking on the Activities tab on the left-hand side navigation bar. Then once we're here, we'll click the Time Quick filter to show time entries only and not expenses. From here, I can input my date range. So Marshall's going to generate this report for last month. He's going to put in the 1st of September until the 30th of September in the 2 boxes, respectively. You can pick any time range that works for your firm. Marshall's weekly activities vary too much for a weekly calculation to be meaningful. And then if he picked a longer time period, for example, 3 or 6 months, the data is not as current, and it might not reflect the current state of his firm's operations. To continue, let's hide some of the columns that we don't need. So we can click the Columns button on the top right-hand side. We'll remove Actions and Type, as we're talking about time entries only. We'll keep Hours, Description, and Matter, so we can see what we did and whether it was billable or non-billable. Next, we'll remove Rate and Amount, as these aren't relevant to our calculation. We'll keep the date and the user column in case we want to do a deeper dive into specific days, weeks, or specific users. And then lastly, we'll remove the invoice column, as again, that's not applicable to our calculation. Once you're done, scroll down, and down, and down.
It's a lot of time entries.
It's a busy guy. Click Export down the bottom of the table. Select CSV, so we're going to get a file that we can open in Excel and not just a printable PDF file. And finally, select Visible Columns, not Available Columns, so we're not going to show all the columns that we just hid. After you export it, you can find it in your Downloads folder. OK, to recap that, we went to the Activities section, showed time entries. Then we got rid of a few columns that we don't need to show. Then, once we're happy with our columns, we scrolled all the way to the bottom, clicked Export, and CSV, Visible Columns Only.
OK, so the file is open in front of you. The first thing is, this is really important, listen carefully. You're going to go to the optometrist and get really powerful set of glasses. Unfortunately, I left mine home today, so we're going to zoom in by clicking the plus sign on the bottom right to magnify the sheet. So the file we're looking at is a CSV file, which stands for comma-separated values, and it's just another plain text file that Excel can open as a spreadsheet. We want to save it as an Excel workbook so that when we go back to this file, it'll retain all the formulas and formatting that we apply. So we can go ahead and click Save As on the warning bar at the top. We can select Excel Workbook as the file type. And we can click Save. So we can play with the data now. Let's start by removing some of the columns that we don't need, some that we couldn't remove in Clio. To do that, let's remove the UTM BMS columns, and we can highlight the 2 column headers to select the whole column. Right-click and delete. We can also get rid of matter description. We're not going to use that for our calculation. Right-click, delete. And let's get rid of the final 4 columns that Clio populates with some information. Select, right-click, and delete. Now, to make the data easier to work with, we're going to apply some filters. So we're going to go ahead and highlight all the columns. Under the Data tab in the ribbon, we're going to select Filters. When you see the icon showing next to the headers, that's when filters, have been applied. Lastly, we're going to expand the column so that we can see all the information in the columns. So we can select all the columns and double-click on one of the column edges to expand.
All right, thanks. Now even I, with my bat-like vision, can see the spreadsheet. OK, next thing, onto our utilization rate calculation. We're going to start by looking at the top of our equation, the billable hours in Clio. And to do that, we'll go to the matter numbers, and then uncheck the admin matter to hide all those time entries that are associated with the non-billable time. Now that it's only billable time remaining, we'll select the hours column, and in the bottom right, Excel sums it up for us nicely. So we'll save that number, type it up here, 23.65 hours. This is our billable time. Next, we want our total time worked, and then finally, we can calculate our utilization rate. To find total time, let's go back to the matters column and add our admin matter back in. So we're looking at all the time entries we've put in now. So as we click that to bring these time entries back, they appear. Then we can go to hours, highlight the column, and again, in the bottom right corner, Excel shows us what the total is. Type that in there. Now for a simple formula, let's type in equals, select the billable hours quantity, hit divide or forward slash, and then select our total hours. Press enter, and we get that. Now one last step, let's go to the home tab of the ribbon, select our cell, and click the format button, and congrats, we've just calculated Marshall's firm's utilization rate.
Good job.
Okay, yeah. So quick recap. We opened the file in Excel, hit all the columns that we didn't need to see. We added filters so that we could separate the billable and the non-billable time and do any other filtering that we want to later. We removed the admin matter to calculate our billable time, got the total from the bottom right corner, added the non-billable time back in to calculate our total time, put that up there as well, and performed the division. And I have a question here. You mind if we save it to the end? But hang on to the... Oh, sorry, go on.
I was going to say, for those of us who don't know Excel, was that just videotaped? Like everything you just did?
That was videotaped. You'll be able to watch the session on YouTube later on, of course. Great. Okay. So moving on.
Great. So we've calculated Marshall's utilization rate, 32%. Okay, so you might be wondering, how is this going to help him improve his firm? Well, let's take a step back and remember why we're looking at utilization rate. We know that lawyers want to be more efficient with their time by reducing time spent on non-billable and administrative tasks. And ultimately, the goal is to optimize for the time that you spend in your firm for revenue. So utilization rate is a good KPI for us in this case because it can tell us a percentage of time that we're spending on non-billables. So the KPI can tell us if we're heading in the right direction. Okay, so we can look at this standalone metric by itself, 32%. What does that mean? We know Marshall works 8 hours a day, and which means only 2.6 hours are billed with a 32% utilization rate. How about when we compare this to the benchmark? Well, we know, according to the Legal Trends report, the average utilization rate is 30%. So although Marshall's rate is slightly higher, it's not great. There's still room for improvement. At this point, we can look deeper into the data. Well, we're tracking all this activity in Clio. What makes up non-billable time? We can look deeper into, are there any processes that you can streamline or areas of improvement that can help reduce the time spent on non-billable work? Sometimes looking at the data is shocking. Like, wow, did Marshall really spend 20 hours last week watching Star Wars?
That's a lot of hours. Well, we all know if it was Star Trek, then that would be billable time. Okay. Thank you. No. So Marshall was reviewing his time spent last month after seeing his average utilization rate. And one of the things he found that he was spending a lot of time on the road meeting with clients. In 1 week, he performed 9 client consultations, 1 hour each. The consultations themselves were billable, which is good. But when factoring in travel time to and from his office and his clients' offices, that was almost 2 hours per consultation, and that's 9 hours of non-billable time just in transit in 1 week. So looking at this, Marshall knew what he had to do. The following month, he changed his consultation strategy. He booked them all on 2 days of the week instead of scattered throughout the week, And he tried to book them back to back to save on doubling up on the travel time between consultations. Now, next month, his utilization rate came out to 39%. Great improvement, right? Of course, we can't say that was wholly attributable to the booking strategy. But what we can say is that that and the other things that Marshall did combined together had a positive effect on his utilization rate. And that's the power of a KPI. You can measure it 1 month, make changes, measure it again, make more changes, and see where you go with it. Now, to summarize, we looked at the data, we calculated, we put all the data into Clio that we needed to, we exported it, we did our calculations, and that gives us our utilization rate, which can be measured over time to see how the changes are improving his practice.
So you see, leveling up your practice is easy, right? As Roger's mentioned, we looked at how we can get the data into Clio, how to export that and calculate. And I know we went through a lot of information today, but I think this framework or this thought process really summarizes it nicely. You should always start with your firm's vision and think about all the strategic goals that you have along with those visions. And you choose KPIs that are effective, that are aligned with those goals and visions. And when you have chosen them, you could start by tracking the necessary data to measure the KPIs. After you've measured it, you could analyze the KPI for insights and implement any changes and take action if necessary. And it's important, as Roger's mentioned, to continuing monitoring the KPI to see if the changes and implementations that you've made are effective and if you're still heading in the right direction. And the cycle continues. So we have some time for questions now. Does anybody want to get us started?
I have a mic if you want to use a mic.
So at the beginning in the activities, it looks like you were trying to keep your data clean, and I didn't really see where that played out in the analysis of the KPI. Is that after the fact, once you go back and look at the activities and say, this is where I spent my time?
Great question. So in this example that we gave a pretty simple one of just looking at your regular matters and your administrative matter. So because of that, the filter that we applied in Excel, the matters columns, that was all already filtered by the matter names. If you were doing a deeper dive into certain types of activities on certain dates by certain people, if you have different people entering different activities, without activity categories, they're typing in those activities each time, and then you get the mess that you saw on the slide earlier. But with activity categories, that standardizes the inputs that each user can put in, and when you're filtering by the activity column, that'll make things easier. Great.
Yes.
Does that answer the question? Excellent. Third row right there.
So we have matter-related non-billable time sometimes. Not everything that you do for a matter is necessarily billable, right? So we have created an admin matter to do for firm admin tasks,
Yep.
but there are still other non-billable hours that are specific to a matter number. So we wouldn't be able to filter that data that way by just pulling up the admin stuff. So how could we do that?
Okay. Great question. The question was for non-billed time, I'll call it that. So it's not administrative work. It's time performed for a client that's just not going to be billed. How can we capture that in this workflow? It's a great question. So right now, we've made the simple separation between your regular matters and your non-billable admin matter. I guess there's a couple of ways you could do it. You could create a separate non-billable client matter, or even for your various clients, create a second matter that's non-billable to track the non-billed time. If you didn't want to go into that much detail, you could use credit notes to write down individual time entries, so there's a difference between what you input and what you're billing at the end of the day.
Can't you just put the activity in, but at $0, the billing rate of 0? So you still capture the hours, but there's no money attached to it.
Yeah.
We have this problem. We have to do secondary analytics when we kick it out. We have to go in and have each item as this counts or not count. It's a completely separate beyond this.
Right.
You have to build a secondary work.
And, right, and I think that's kind of where when I'm trying to run data, right, and trying to see what our utilization rate is, but we have a category set up for each matter that is admin non-billable for that matter. But to filter data this way to get a true accounting of what your utilization rate is, doesn't take into account those non-billable hours that are matter specific. And so getting my attorneys to go to the right, and if I create a non-billable counter for Mr. Jones and then a billable matter for Mr. Jones, getting them to go to the proper, that's not going to happen. So I guess what we've been doing is having to go and filter by category, you know, which is very time consuming and you have to do it manually. So I just didn't know if there was maybe a workaround or a way to make that process more efficient, to get a true accounting if you wanted to keep track of the non-billable time that's spent on each matter, not necessarily ad hoc.
Okay, again, for those who aren't in the room right now, there was a bit of discussion about how we can capture non-billable time still done for clients. The current way of doing it requires a few more steps, not exactly as simple as what we showed just then. We can take this offline and go into a more detail about that. And also the Clio lab is a great place to give this kind of feedback to, because that would be a great feature to see in Clio. Thank you.
I've got the mic. So I was just wondering, I know you only had a limited time, but are there other KPIs that are easily generated from within Clio? You mentioned earlier in your presentation average revenue per matter or things like that. So it's all data that's in Clio. Are there, I guess, two questions. Other KPIs, and are there any reports that exist that can do this fairly easily for us?
I'll get this one. Yeah, a great question. Are there ways to get these KPIs directly out of Clio, or are there other things that we can generate from in Clio? So the first part, which I think is the bulk of the question, do we have any things that you can just click a button and have appear in Clio? Right now, this session, we're going a bit beyond what we can do within Clio and sort of taking it out of Clio into Excel, do some more custom reporting and calculations. The reason we can't, quite simply, is we haven't built those features into Clio yet. We constantly upgrade or releasing updates and features, in no small part due to the great feedback and feature requests that we receive. And our product managers are constantly sort of prioritizing what they're going to build next. So I've said it a few times, but if there's a case for it, for sure, tell them all about it, and they'll be happy to hear, and hopefully we'll see it soon.
All right, well, everyone, we're finished a little early, so put your hands together for Fiona and Roger.